Don't know if my streaming software is going to keep up. There we go. Lovely. How are we all today? As you can tell by the title, today we're going to discuss parenting and the Texas heartbeat pill and how they intertwine. And then we're going to go over it for an old video from about 8 years ago from a channel. What's that channel called? Till Swan, covering the topic of abortion. So we'll just see if anybody follows the link I've put out. We'll give that one tasty minute. And then if there's nobody in the next minute, we'll just begin. It's always nice to have a bit of interaction if there's going to be any. And if not, hello to you if you're watching this on replay later. Forgive me for any moments of awkward silence. I'm not a professional at this, as you can tell by the equipment and the lighting. Nice shadow on the wall behind me. Lovely shadow. Does anybody ever have problems with streaming software? I know I do. Oh, well, there we go. Right, so, hot topic, parenting. Where do we start? Do we start with the men or the women? Fathers or the mothers? Because that's a more important question. Who do we want to concentrate upon? Give me a kicking off point. We'll see where we go. Hello, people. So I was going to start with the mothers, but that might be representative. So, should we start with the fathers and what they should do? Parenting wise, of course. Yes? No? Mothers? Fathers? Which one should we go for? Start with the fathers. Okay, so what is a father's role in parenting? First, we've got to know why a father would become one. And that would be because he thinks that he's met a woman who could be a mother. So there's the first thing to understand. For me, the perspective. If you're going to be a father, you have to meet a mother. And if you're going to be a mother, you have to meet a father. So how do you judge that? That would be the very first question you have to ask yourself when it comes to parenting. I would expect. Full closure. I'm not a parent. So in terms of a father, first thing they should do is know exactly what is best from a mother. Where do you usually get that from? Your own parents. That would be a good place to start. That's if they're good parents, mind you. So obviously, there's an example that you're supposed to follow that should be set. And that's where parenting all begins, the example. Because when it comes to children, they imitate. They try to live up to the expectation of what they see their parents as. So on the perspective of a father, what example do you want to show to your children? And in being a father, if you have a daughter, what do you do then? Especially if you end up being a single father. Who knows? But I would say the example is where you start. That's where you need some self-reflection to know whether you're doing a good job at it. So when it comes to parenting, father's role is generally the provider, the protector, and the one who installs discipline. And why is that? Well, you need the focus of the discipline to be able to self-reflect, to know that you are able to provide and able to protect. And the best way to do that is to teach the lessons. The lessons of fatherhood and what it means to be a father. That's what you should be teaching to your children. Even if they're your daughter instead of your son, you should teach them what a father's role is, so that when it comes time for them to choose a father, find that example, they know exactly what they're looking for. And again, this all overlaps and can be applied to the mothers as well. If you want to be a parent, you have to look for someone who you know could be a good father. And exactly the same rules apply. So it doesn't matter whether I'm talking about fathers or mothers. It's exactly the same. You start off by picking the best other parent, and then when it comes to having children, your role is to set the example of what that child should aim to become, just as part of their pure biology, form and function, as we covered in my last live stream. So what is parenting? Basically, it's setting the example. There's not much more to say on that. It's not about giving the advice or, you should earn so much or you should give them this, that, or the other. It's about showing them how to be a human being. Which is why a two-parent household is the best environment. Because whether it's a daughter or a son, they need the example of both a man and a woman so they know what to look for in life, who to trust, how to become an adult, how to take care of the world. And that doesn't mean the leftists' idea of taking care of the world by installing everybody around you with your same moral compass. It's not how that works. You should live out the example of what you want people to become, not beg for a tyrant to make everybody else into you. It's definitely not the way it works. Any questions so far? Because that explanation is quite short, I know, but it doesn't need to be detailed. It's like whatever the event is, take the action that you would think is serving the best example to your son or daughter. And then when you see it reflected in them and they start acting out the example that you're setting, then you get that self-reflection and the empathetic reflection. That's what leads to the revelation which sets principles that you then act upon. And everything that you do as an act should be for the pinnacle of form and function. Good. So shall we move on, straight on, to the Texas Heartbeat Bill and exactly what it means for humanity and why people would be against it, especially people who are already parents. Shall we go there, or will this get a bit heated? obviously YouTube's going to be very sensitive about it, because it contains the magic A word that everybody's afraid of and doesn't want to discuss. Oh no, you can't say that in public. Because it ties directly in. It's like, what example are you setting to children if you, as a potential mother, or even a potential father who pressures the mother into it, it leads to that moment where you end up deciding that a child is not best for you at that moment in time. Right, basically the Texas Heartbeat Bill says that if you can ultrasound a baby and detect a heartbeat, which is generally after the first 6 weeks, that it creates a cause of action directly for the father of the child to bring a civil suit against the doctor performing the operation, as it were. And so why does the left come out with all of these arguments? The argument that, oh, if you haven't got it safe, legal, and on demand, that women are going to seek backstreet operations. And it's like, well, that's the bigotry of low expectations, saying that these people will be so desperate to get rid that they're going to put their own lives at risk to do it. And it's like, why would you do that? And then you've got the other thing, there's no exceptions in it for cases of forced pregnancy, as it were. Dancing around with words because we all know the censors don't like it. Well, it does. But it places the responsibility on the woman. And that's what it all derives into. They don't want the responsibility. And what is that responsibility? Well, it's choosing when to have the consensual act that would result in pregnancy. It's like, if you can't control yourself in that aspect, you know, your body, your choice. Yes, but it's your choice to consent to the thing that would get you pregnant. So don't, if you're not willing to have a child, if it's not your time of life, if you haven't achieved your hedonistic goals of this, that, or the other. You know, if you're more in pursuit of a career than motherhood, it's like, just don't perform the act that could get you pregnant. And that comes back, and then they say, well, what about when it's forced upon them? And either way, you know that the act has happened. You know that the outcome of that act may be pregnancy. And so if it comes from an unwanted place and you don't want to bear the child of someone who would force that upon you, then you know that it's happened. And there are options. Safe, legal, on-demand options. You can get any time you like. All you have to do is say, I believe that an act has happened where I may be pregnant. I would like to take what the Americans call Plan B, what the UK would call the morning after. And there you go. But then they say, oh, what about the trauma? What about the psychological issues? What about knowing the police won't help to catch the person who done it, and living with knowing that they're still alive and out there and may punish you for such things? And it's like, what? You've got 6 weeks from the day that it happens. That's all I can say. So all of these people bitching that if abortion isn't there as and when a woman wants it, it's like, well, don't use it as contraception. The greatest contraception in the world is abstinence. And if it's your body and your choice, choose to do with your body what will not get you pregnant. I.e., don't be promiscuous. Don't just lend it to anybody for your own instant gratification. Hope that makes sense. And then, oh, what about accidents? And it's like, well, accidents can happen, so same response. Leave it alone if you aren't willing to bear the burden. Does that sound reasonable? Can women control themselves? And then people might pop up with the argument, oh, how am I supposed to get a man who might want to be a father in the future if I'm not willing to get into bed with him? And it's like, well, look, that works both ways. In terms of men and women, there is a mutual respect that if you say that that's reserved for the time of when a pregnancy would be accepted, then you both know the terms. Simple as. And then if a man scooches off in pursuit of women who will give themselves up, then they don't want to be a father in the first place. So why would you choose that anyway? And yes, that is the conservative viewpoint. Form and function. If you're going to perform an act, you do it for the reason that the act is performed. Pure and simple. Are we all hunky-dory? Can I get a thumbs up and a hell yeah? See, this is why it'd be good for people to see this and comment. Really get this spicing up. Because it's like, what argument can you place against that? That the best way to protect yourself and to stop any arguments and to stop all this hubbub about, oh, is it a constitutional right in America, or should it be legally enshrined that women should be able to get an abortion as and when they want it? It's like, no. The first port of call is the responsibility of the woman. What turned procreation into a frivolous act of self-gratification? The women's liberation movement and Planned Parenthood. My personal view on abortion is that it shouldn't happen ever if it can be avoided. And in the cases where it was forced upon a woman, as I said just a tiny bit earlier, if the heartbeat is going to be the measure of when you would sense that emotional connection, that it's actually a human being rather than a growing lump of cells or a fetus or the size of a pinprick or whatever they want to call it, then yeah, that should be the cutoff point. If you can't decide in the first 6 weeks from the event of which you think that you may have been involved in something that could get you pregnant, then what hope do you have in life if you can't make a decision within 6 weeks upon a matter like that? It's like, that's why I think there should be reasonable leeway to say that if a woman believes they have been forced into it, that they have the option of the pill. to do it. I personally believe that if it gets to the point where you have to have someone else's assistance to remove the potential life, then that's conspiracy to murder. And that you are a responsible person, and that if it was a consensual act that brought it about, and the father would quite happily have the child and raise the child, that if the woman goes through with the action without the father's knowledge, and then they find out, that they should be able to bring a suit for intentional infliction of emotional distress via conspiracy to murder. You might think, oh, that's a strong view, and it's like, no, it's a common sense view. It's like, imagine it with, I know it's not the same thing, and it's not directly comparable, so you may say, oh, well, that's a weird analogy. But if a couple exists that have a home, and they want to get a pet, and they go to an adoption center to get a pet, and then for some reason one of them changes their mind and they go back to the adoption center and they say, oh, I don't like the idea of my partner still wanting a pet, and I know that they will disagree with me, so the only way out I can see is for you to put down the animal. Would you let that happen? Is that acceptable? Yes. Contraception is a thing. And I mean, if you're in a relationship where you're prepared to accept that contraception still carries the risk of not working, then yeah, that's an option. I wouldn't consider it an option for the having fun, as you put it there. Because that's what brought all this about in the first place. Promiscuity and instant gratification. And that you should be free to dilly-dally around wherever you like, doing what you want. Bumping uglies with any Tom, Dick and Harry that'll buy you a drink. You know, it's like, how low of a bar do you set yourself? How much in need of that moment are you in to just give it away to whatever comes along first? That goes for men as for women. You know, men shouldn't be doing it either. Men shouldn't encourage it. And in a large part, it's men's fault for, being greedy and hungry for it. But it's a woman's prerogative as to who she consents to commit the act with. So the responsibility is there on both parts. If a man doesn't want the responsibility of raising a child, he shouldn't do the things that a woman shouldn't do if they're not prepared to have a child. That's the way I view it. I think that's common sense, and I think a lot of people will be on board with that line of thinking. It's like, don't commit the act, and then there's no risk. If you're not ready to be a parent, don't go bonking round. Simple. Everyone can say, oh, that's a religious view. It's got nothing to do with the religion. It's just the common sense of the function of biology. It's like, if you're going to do that, child becoming pregnant, is a possibility. So you should bear that responsibility and only do it if you're prepared to raise the resulting child out of it. Men cannot give birth. They do not have the biological function to give birth. They only have the biological functionality to impregnate. Just so that's cleared up. If it's called a man, it better have the ability to ejaculate. That life-giving elixir called semen and sperm. Because if you can't do that, then I'm not on about the outliers and, medical complications or something goes genetically wrong, or for whatever reason you have to remove them, or the testes, that is, or it didn't come about, or there's something wrong with your seminal gland, or I'm not on about that. I'm on about if you are biologically capable of functioning as a man should, then yeah. And it's not a law. It's not a law against women anyway. It's a law against people who provide abortions. It's not a law controlling the woman. The woman's in control of herself. Don't get pregnant in the first place. That's what I mean. Where's the responsibility? Why don't women want to accept the responsibility? Why is there all this noise that women shouldn't be responsible over the possibility that they could get pregnant? And if a woman is fully self-controlled and bears that responsibility and doesn't launch herself into the act, and the act is forced upon her, then that's why I would say give the leeway. You know the act has happened, you know a pregnancy may result from it, so there should be that option that while it's possible to do it via your own choice of asking for a pill that does it, then that should be the option. But as soon as you have to ask someone else for the assistance to do it, that should be the cut-off point. If you can't do it, if it's gone beyond the day of being able to achieve it chemically, or if achieving it chemically you would suffer, why would you want to put yourself through that? I don't know up to what period you can do it via the chemical method. Yeah. Yep. Well, there we go. It all comes down to the personal responsibility to resist the want for instant gratification, and that's generally the idea with most things in life. Life isn't about what you can get now, it's about what you can do now to get what the future may bring you. So, I hope that's answered everything and fully covered why the Texas Heartbeat Bill doesn't really change things that much, apart from the fact that a father can now sue a doctor if a doctor wants to provide the operation. It's got nothing to do with women. It's not a law against women, because a woman who engages in the act and ends up doing that, if they don't want the child, then you have the option of the chemical option within hours of it happening, if not the next day, up to the point where you can recognize as soon as it turns from unrecognizable cells into a part of human biology that you can witness elsewhere. I don't know how far along that is, but a heartbeat would be a very clear sign of that. You know. Are we good? Shall we move on to analysing this video of a woman talking about whether or not women should have abortions? Should we get in there and really dig on the subject? It's an old video, but it covers the subject, you know. Let me just arrange things. If I move myself over here. And we bring up that window. Oh, let me skip to that tab. Should be ready to go, if you can see that. I haven't watched this video, this is fresh commentary. There isn't any sound on this bit, so nobody goes saying, oh, there's no sound. She believes fully in the freedom of choice, including abortion. Might be the right choice for them to make. Well, I've covered that.
Hello everyone.
Hello.
Given the fact that I've been sticking my neck out and talking about a bunch of controversial subjects lately, I thought that today a good subject would be abortion. For most people, the big question in relation to abortion is, when does life begin?
No. The big question in being able to get an abortion is, should a woman be responsible for performing the act that gets her pregnant? Not when does life begin. Life begins at conception. Because without the conception, as she pointed out, let me see if I can go back to it. There you go. Given that there must be life present even for conception to occur, I do not celebrate the idea of abortion. Well, if life must be present for the event of conception to occur, then life has the responsibility of what life it brings into the world. So.
Hello everyone. Lately, I thought that today a good subject would be abortion. For most people, the big question in relation to abortion is, when does life begin? So here is my answer. There is life that is present in everything. There is life that is present even before the physical being is conceived. There must be a flow of consciousness that exists prior to conception. There has to be a flow of consciousness.
There you go. Flow of consciousness prior to conception. Committing the act that produces conception.
Consciousness which exists even to attract the cascade of events which goes into the conception and development of a human being. But this is where everything starts to get hazy.
Why?
Everyone likes a straightforward answer, but this is...
And the answer is straightforward. If you're not prepared to bear a child, don't commit the act that may bring a child into the world.
This is not how life often works. A sperm is a unit of consciousness that is a projection of the man's desire for the continuation of his perspective. An egg is a unit of consciousness that is a projection of the woman's desire for the continuation of her perspective. Each is seeking unity and creation, and each is a match to the other's desire.
And there you go. If the desire is between the people who produce these organisms that produce the birth, then that desire should only be expressed when you're both ready for the conception to take place and for the child to be born.
There must be consciousness present for conception to occur, but the question is, whose consciousness?
Whose consciousness? We know whose consciousness. The two people who make it happen.
The answer is sometimes the consciousness of the mother, and sometimes the consciousness of a separate, non-physical being. Sometimes the forming of a new physical, biological human is the byproduct of the mother's energy. The energy and consciousness of the mother is the same energy and consciousness that is creating the physical fetus. And so, for lack of a better way of explaining it, she is pregnant with herself.
Is she? Immaculate conception? Or is she just saying that a woman's used a man to get pregnant and disposed of the man, so it's got nothing to do with the man's consciousness? Seems a bit weird.
When this is the case, usually as the child takes its first breath, that breath is the mutual agreement for the consciousness of a separate eternal being other than the mother to focus its energy and attention into the physical perspective.
Okay, so a baby's first breath is its want to have consciousness. Right.
The baby is now being breathed by its eternal self.
Yes.
That is the time that the separate, first person perspective of the being that is the baby has been fully activated.
Fully activated, but not realized. Realization is when conception occurs. So you can't tell me that you should be able to abort up to full term because the baby isn't itself until it takes its first breath outside of the connection to the mother. That's a stupid argument.
Often, but not always, up until this first breath, the potential eternal self has been observing the physical perspective of the fetus more so than it has been participating in the actual physical perspective of the fetus. So it holds a third person rather than a first person perspective relative to the fetus. Therefore, though there is life force present, it could be said that this physical body of the fetus can be seen as more of a potential individual life form.
No, it is an individual life form as soon as conception occurs.
Because at this time, it is a physical manifestation of the continuation of the mother's energy. However,
she's using the parasite argument. It's a disgusting argument. A baby's not a parasite.
Other times, the intention on behalf of the non-physical being is such that that focus...
What non-physical being? A baby is a physical being. Whether it's a sperm is a physical being, an ovum is a physical being. When they connect, they create a one single unique being. That being the child. It may not realize that it has a consciousness and that it's a separate human being, but the people who created that child through the act of delivering those two consciousnesses together to continue whatever she said, then you have a child.
And that intention becomes the focal point which attracts all of the events which are necessary for a physical being and that kind of creation. So it is the focus of another non-physical being that attracts the sperm and the egg, that attracts every necessary condition, and it is that energy which is going into the development of the fetus. So with this...
Is she making an argument for God willing it? That's what it sounds like. What is this non-physical being that has made all of these cascading events happen?
This type of life form is more like a co-creation. And when this is the case, the non-physical being, whose stream of consciousness is separate from the mother's stream of consciousness, is the one which is participating.
She keeps calling it a non-physical being. It's a physical being. Two physical things have come together to create a new physical thing. That physical thing is the child. And even though that child starts off as a singular cell, it can't become a child unless it started off as a singular cell. That's how biology works.
Fully in the gestation. Though the mother's body is co-creating the child, the stream of consciousness that is flowing through the fetus is a separate stream of energy from the mother's stream of consciousness.
So she just called the baby a separate being, even though the woman is gestating it. So where's this non-physical being with the consciousness that creates the cascade of events that brings about whatever?
When this is the case, the stream of energy flowing from the non-physical being that has supported and co-created the fetus.
Non-physical being? What is this non-physical being?
With the mother merely fully takes over upon first breath. So that being said, some beings participate more in the first-person perspective of being inside of the womb and of that entire process which we call development of a human fetus.
Yes.
Because attachment in first-person perspective is a much different perspective than your eternal perspective. A being who has come in this way, who is actively participating in the first-person perspective of being an embryo in the process of development.
Obviously it can't. Is that going to be your argument for why you should be able to abort it? Because let's listen to that again.
Being inside of the womb and of that entire process, more like a separate stream of energy from the mother stream of consciousness. When this is the case, the stream of energy flowing from the non-physical being that has supported and co-created the fetus with the mother merely fully takes.
Or is she calling the man a non-physical being? Because that's also a feminist disgusting argument.
Over upon first breath. So that being said, some beings participate more in the first-person perspective of being inside of the womb and of that entire process which we call development of a human fetus. Because attachment in first-person perspective is a much different perspective than your eternal perspective. A being who has come in this way, who is actively participating in the first-person perspective of being an embryo in the process of development. This being would have a lot more resistance relative to the idea of being aborted.
So she's saying that because it can't provide resistance, it can't have a first-person perspective of what's being done to it. Therefore, abortion should be fully fine.
Usually the level of participation in the physical experience increases as the gestational period goes on.
Right.
Especially when there's a development of the brain and the nervous system, which is really the manifestation of ego.
No, it's a manifestation of biology. But let's let her go on. It's not of ego. You don't have an ego until you have the first person perception, as she put it. You don't have a chance to create your own ego, as it were.
And ego breeds attachment, and so when that development occurs, if the being is a separate non-physical being which is participating in the first-person perspective of being inside of this fetus, in that perspective.
She's saying that consciousness is a non-physical being, and that the consciousness has to inhabit the baby in the womb before it becomes a separate conscious being from the mother. It's very spiritual, but some people might agree with the idea that the spirit has to possess a body, but I would find that to be a satanic argument. So
there's going to be a much different experience there relative to the concept of abortion, because this being will have already attached to the idea of a separate ego, and the attachment is going to create a resistance to death.
How lovely. Nice picture to pause it on. How can something that has no physical way of resisting what's happening to it actively participate in not being killed? She's saying that if the baby was a separate entity with its own consciousness, it would put up a fight. How?
Late-term abortion is experienced differently by the fetus than early-term abortion.
Obviously.
The being is reactive to external stimuli.
She keeps calling it a being instead of a child. That's disturbing.
That point, and so late-term abortion is something which it will resist, and resistance leads to pain. Because of this pain, it will not experience the same ease of transition as it would earlier in development.
Ease of transition, that's what she calls it. Being crushed and torn apart and taken out. If you haven't got your own brain and nervous system, you won't put up any resistance, therefore you won't feel pain, therefore it's perfectly okay to make this transition happen.
Which is why
sick bitch.
It is always far better, as far as suffering is concerned, for both mother and child to abort early on in the pregnancy if you decide to get an abortion.
Yes, but if it requires another person to make it happen, you have conspired to kill a child. which is why the Texas Heartbeat Bill was brought in. As soon as you can detect that this non-conscious separate being is, surviving for itself via its own heartbeat. That's what the whole point of the bill is.
A being which operates from its non-physical perspective does not.
A being that operates from its non-physical perspective would mean that it's separated its physical from its consciousness. Once again, that's a left-wing argument that derives all the way down to the suspension of all law and all morals and all function of being in the first place.
Not hold resistance because that eternal perspective is a non-resistance type of focus. And so there is not as much resistance to the idea of death as there would be in a being which has taken its first breath. The ease of transition will be much increased.
So she's saying because it's easy to make it happen, because you won't get any resistance to it happening, because the baby hasn't got enough consciousness or the ability to fight back. Oh, it's perfectly fine.
For a being who is operating from its eternal perspective. Sometimes it is the resistance to pregnancy which brings pregnancy on. Because as we know, any focus against something is focus on the thing that you don't want, and thus it must manifest in your experience. Other times, a child may manifest in response to somebody's true desires, even desires that we are sometimes unaware of.
How can you be unaware of it? You are perfect. She's saying that you may get pregnant by chance, and that you may have not expected. You may not be doing the act to get pregnant, but it may happen. She's using fluffy language.
In other words, a child may come in response to so many things you've been consciously or subconsciously asking for. And there are many motives which exist within us that we are not consciously aware of. For example, many couples consciously think that they do not want a baby, but they take no steps to prevent conception with contraception.
Or abstinence.
This is often a contradiction between the consciousness and subconscious wanting that is present within an individual or within a couple's united consciousness. We are creators at heart.
Yes.
The intense alignment which occurs during a passionate interaction, which involves intercourse, is a summoning forth of an intense flow of energy. It is an invitation for creation. It is an invitation for new life. We are all here because of intention, and we all have different intentions.
And if your intention is to be promiscuous and lay about with whoever and you end up getting pregnant that way, and that's the reason you want the abortion, because you don't know who the father is, or because you don't think that whoever may be the father may be a responsible father, then it's your responsibility. You're the one who's committed that act. You don't have... It should never be the way that you go about life. You shouldn't lay about and then use abortion as a form of contraception.
I can promise you that a being, if this is a non-physical consciousness,
It's physical consciousness. It can't be a non-physical consciousness. It's there. There is matter that is the child. It's physical.
Just the mother's energy that is now creating the physical form of a fetus. If a non-physical entity opts into the experience of coming into a pregnancy where the intention is abortion, I can promise you that that entity knows exactly what it is getting into. It has opted into that experience on purpose because that kind of experience gives rise to a ton of expansion, not only for the child, but also for the mother.
Is she on about a doctor here?
I can promise you that if it was the full intention of a non-physical being to come into a body which was intended to line up with long-term survival, it would not be a match to even lining up with someone who would consider abortion or who would actually succeed with going through with it.
So she's saying that if the child has its own consciousness and therefore could communicate with the mother, and it would say, I don't want to be aborted, it would do so, and then the abortion wouldn't happen.
A woman's body is the vortex through which life flows to the infant, to this being.
Yes.
It is always a woman's choice whether she allows or does not allow that being to draw from her life energy.
Wrong. Ugh. It's the same left-wing arguments over and over again. Oh, it's not a baby. Oh, it hasn't got a consciousness. It can't feel anything. Oh, it's the woman's body, and the woman's body feeds the baby, and the baby's a parasite just living off of the mother.
It is always within a woman's capability and choice to decide whether she is going to allow herself to be the vortex through which energy flows to an infant or not.
Therefore, it's the woman's choice whether she commits the act in which a sperm may meet an ovum and produce a child in the first place. Therefore, it's the woman's responsibility to be abstinent from such activity if she doesn't want to get pregnant. And if you're in a relationship where you don't want a child just yet, but you have selected a partner from which you may want a child in the future, and it just so happens that contraception may fail, and you have to be aware of that, then yeah.
From the standpoint of this universe, no one ever makes a bad decision, because every decision leads to more knowing. Every decision leads you to know more of who you really are and what you truly want. So we cannot make an enemy of any decision, even a decision that is as intensely difficult as this one.
It's not difficult. If you don't want to be pregnant, don't do the thing that gets you pregnant. If you're saying that you should be allowed to do the thing, yes, you should be allowed to do the act that may get you pregnant. But if you don't want to be pregnant, obviously there's contraception that may be involved. But as far as I can see, unless you're prepared to have a child, don't do the act whatsoever, contraception or not. I have to plug my laptop in 1 second. Good, sorry about that.
There is no such thing as a mistake.
There is performing the act in the first place.
We can make decisions which do not match our true desires and who we really are, and we learn quickly when we do that.
Yes.
But that is all. It is true that women feel different when they're on their way to the abortion clinic. Some feel much more negative emotion relative to the decision because where they are relative to what they want is different. Our desires change according to our current position and perspective in life. This is why you can never ever find the right decision relative to abortion.
Yes, you can. As I said, if you aren't ready to be a parent, don't commit to the act that may make you a parent. If it is forced upon you, you have the option of knowing that the act has happened, and therefore you can do it chemically before the ovum even splits into 2 cells. It takes 3 days.
You can only ever find your right decision. To assign right or wrong to a concept like abortion, or really any concept at all, is a byproduct of man's disconnected consciousness.
Disconnected.
It is not an opinion which Source or that which you know as God shares.
So, she does believe in God, and yet she believes in the right to an abortion because she keeps calling a child a non-physical consciousness that hasn't manifest until it's got a brain and a nervous system from which it can draw an ego, and therefore it would resist abortion. So if she's saying do it early, why it hasn't got a brain and a... But she's talking around about it all in this spiritual manner to make it sound fluffy and nice and...
In truth, we like to think that Source or God thinks that abortion is wrong
because he does. Because it's not a function of biology. As I said in my last video, the idea of God is the personification of form-meeting function to create beauty and merit or greatness
because it makes
on the universal scale.
us so uncomfortable to think of the idea of taking the life of another member of our own race. I would like to point out that those who push against this decision, usually from a religious perspective, quite often hold a double standard.
Do
They
they now?
hold to the idea that the most basic human right is the right to be allowed to live. But
Yes.
many of them are the same people who support the death penalty and support war.
They may support the death penalty for those who wish to bring death into the world, or wish to disturb innocence to the point where it can't live without the conscious harm of that for the rest of their life. We know what I mean by that. Interfering with children. Pro-war, no one's pro-war. If you are pro-war, you're a psychopath.
And what's more, they fail to recognize the value in all life, not just human life. Most of the people who are anti abortion hold human life as more sacred than any other form of life, so to many, there is a difference between killing an animal life form for the purpose of consumption and killing a human child before it is allowed to come into the physical experience because it is not wanted. I also
So she's saying it's more ethical to be vegan than it is to be anti-abortion. So she cares about animals more than human beings. So she doesn't love any of humanity. That shows you why she may have the opinions that she has. She hasn't found a man that she thinks would be a suitable father for any child that she may want to bring into the world.
want to point out that there is absolutely no validity behind the argument that abortion is going to become a new form of birth control.
Excuse me? Since the invention of Planned Parenthood way back when, that's all it's ever been. First it was a eugenics program to wipe out the existence of any black person in America. The creator of it, Margaret Sanger, she said that. It's always been a eugenics program to lower the population of any undesired demographic.
Though a woman might feel some sensation of relief when a pregnancy is terminated, no woman on this earth is going to rejoice in the fact that her pregnancy has been terminated.
Have you seen TikTok?
Indeed, many never get over the pain of making that very decision.
Then don't put yourself in the position to have to make that decision in the first place.
The mother's energy is the energy which is supporting and creating the unborn child, and so, on a spiritual level, aborting a child feels very much like taking your own life.
Then why would you do it?
It does not come naturally to any woman to abort a child, even if it is the most downstream and therefore the best option at the time.
It's never the best option, obviously, if it puts you in a position where you're suffering from the trauma of doing it, or suffer all this negative emotion of having to do it in the first place. I'm going to give up on this video soon.
Another issue which is often related to abortion is contraception. Those who are against abortion argue that God decides when souls are ready to come into a life in the physical. And
technically,
deciding to prevent life with contraceptives is an act against God's will.
yes, because you are taking away the function of the form.
I could do an entire video on contraception just by itself. It is an incredibly complex topic.
No, it's not.
Even though the human race is not at this point in general now, it is a possibility for you to use your mind to control whether you conceive or don't conceive, or whether you impregnate a woman or not.
And there's the crux of the fucking matter. And that's where I'm going to end my review and commentary on that video. Because I think that answers everything. So, is there anything that I said that you might have a question about? You know? Or does it, in the end, all boil down to the woman's responsibility to not get pregnant in the first place? Which is it? Does a woman have control over her own body, and therefore if she doesn't want to be pregnant, she can choose not to perform the act that may get her pregnant? Or is a woman's body not her own because she might have to conceive, at some point she may conceive a child through performing the act with a man? And therefore, should she abandon, any conscious thought that the baby is a separate being and that it's her energy providing this non-conscious being? It's a crock of shit. Ugh. All said and done, it should be the woman's responsibility to not lay us with a man. And if a woman feels that intense bond and emotional connection to a man, she should expect that man to want to be a father. And she should see in that man the qualities of a man who she would want to be a father to a child. And therefore, the only way that she would perform the act to get pregnant in the first place would be to have the child. Thank you. Well, I hope other people watch this at some point and then argue with me in the comments or make a video response. And it all comes down to the same thing. Oh, there might be a religious objection. Fuck that off to the side for 1 second. And just think about it logically in terms of biology, you know. And then this whole argument goes away. It's got nothing to do with politics or religion. It's got everything to do with biology and the process itself. Science. Believe in the science. We have to trust science. If there's one thing that science didn't make up, it's that if you do the nasty, you bump uglies, you may exchange the bodily fluid, which may result in the exchange of chromosomes, and therefore produce a child. That's known, that's evident, that's been the way since the beginning. So, you cannot use that as an argument. Anyway, I think we're done here. So thank you very much for watching, and you know where to leave a comment if you think of any questions or want to argue the point with me. Please leave it a like if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more, because there may be more videos coming out, maybe not on this subject, but round and round with other subjects. Remember to click that alert bell if you want to receive alerts. Casually drop by every now and again, and you might see a new video. And if this brought you enough information that you may want to slip in a monetary donation to say thank you, then there's a link in the description to my Streamlabs. Hope you all have a wonderful evening. Night.